Let me ask you a question. If AI can now answer many of our assessment questions, are we still asking the right ones? Hi, I'm Robbie. I'm Head of Business Consulting here at Cirrus, and I'm joined today by the wonderful Cristina, who heads up our partnerships team and always brings so much energy and insight to these conversations. And I'm also delighted today that we have with us Paula-Lee Baetu, who is a leading psychometrician, and she's going to talk to us about one of the most important and sometimes one of the least understood parts of assessment, which is psychometrics. Paula, Cristina, thank you both so much for being here. This is actually an episode that I've really been looking forward to because psychometrics sits right at the center of what we're doing to make a good assessment. And we all know it's really important, but for a lot of us, and I include myself, it can still feel a little bit mysterious. So today, hopefully, we're going to explore a bit more about what psychometrics actually is, why it matters more than ever in this age of AI, and maybe most importantly, how it can help us to collect better evidence of what people really know and what they can do. So Paula, welcome. Looking forward to speaking to you.
Thanks, Robbie. It's great to be here.
So before we get into the detail, psychometrics is really quite a specialized field. So can I ask you, what first drew you towards it, and how has that led you to where you are today?
Like most people in the HR space and similar, I kind of fell into psychometrics a bit by accident. I actually wanted to be a neuropsychologist, and before that, I wanted to be a wildlife photographer. But I got really, really interested in psychometrics through completing my honors dissertation. And I used a really fantastic psychometric to complete that called the Dennis-Kaplan. And that just opened the world for me in terms of what psychometrics are and the power of them. But I really stayed in the space because I could see how the power of these tools were so great. And there's so many benefits of using psychometrics, such as the objectivity of having psychometrics as part of your hiring and development process. But there's also realizing how much unchecked power these tools have over people's lives, such as whether people get hired or promoted or if they're marked as high potential. So it's important that we look at tools and we're verifying them correctly and deciding whether a tool actually works. So yeah, psychometrics can sound like the scary academic field, but really my job is more practical than that. It's making sure that the questions someone answers in an assessment actually tell you something true rather than just feeling official.
So from wildlife photographer to psychometrician, that's a fairly dramatic transition, actually. But you used the phrase there, unchecked power, which is interesting because one thing that I've certainly noticed over the last year or so when I'm speaking to organizations is that I don't hear anyone really talking about evidence. What they're talking about is AI and security, maybe cheating regulations, maybe even locking down their assessment. I was talking to someone just last week, actually, who said to me, we've tightened our security. We're working with our proctor provider to strengthen our proctoring. We're right in the middle of rewriting our regulations to make them tougher and to make the consequences of cheating more severe. But now we don't actually feel confident that our assessment is still measuring what we really care about. If you heard that, Paula, what do you think that the real problem is that they're describing there?
Yeah, I think I want to touch on 2 points. The one is the unchecked power piece, because I've worked over the last 12 years validating and auditing a number of tools for organizations. And I've worked with organizations like Interview, LVMH, NHS, and working with tools from a competency-based assessment, structured interviews, personality tools. The problem is with the unchecked piece is that only a couple hundred of the thousands of tools on the market have been independently reviewed by the British Psychological Society. So it's also part of my drive to make sure that from a psychometric point of view, that those tools are being checked and validated. But to answer your question in terms of security and proctoring, it tells me that the real problem was never about security in the first place. Tightening, proctoring, and rewriting regulations protects you against cheating, but it doesn't on its own tell you anything about whether assessment is actually measuring the right thing. So that's what I do as part of the validation process. We have to check, is it accurate? Is it fit for purpose? So if we're not doing that initial first step, then we're probably looking in the wrong direction. So you can have a perfectly locked down exam that still isn't good evidence whether someone can do the job. So security answers the question of, can we trust the delivery? Not really, can we trust the result? But I don't want to dismiss the security piece entirely because it still matters, right? I know some assessment providers are going as far as measuring or tracking mouse movements across the screen to check that it's a human behind there the whole time. But honestly, if someone is determined enough, they'll probably find some loophole somehow. But I think the reassuring thing for our audience is that the vast majority of people are deterred from that cheating piece long before that point. So just knowing that there's monitoring in place, that they might be asked to complete an in-person equivalent, you might be called in and do that if something looks off. If you're putting that up front, that's usually enough to stop people from trying. Yes, you can't get them all, but you will get the vast majority then that are deterred from that.
People talk about AI proof assessment, and every time I hear that phrase, I can't help but think that I'm actually not sure that that's the right approach. I think I'd much rather ask, what evidence would convince us that somebody is actually genuinely competent? So am I seeing that in the right way, or am I oversimplifying it?
I think it's an oversimplification at all, Robbie. I think it might even be the opposite. So AI proof puts technology right at the center of the conversation, as though the whole problem is AI. But the real question underneath it is always being the same one. What evidence would actually convince us that someone is genuinely competent? So AI hasn't changed that question. It's almost just made it much harder to avoid answering it. And we get the fear because the scale of what is driving this urgency is huge. So in 2026, a survey by HEPI, HEPI, and Cortex found that 94% of UK graduates now use AI for their assessed work. That's up from 88% the year before. It's a massive jump, and it's only continuing. But you can see organizations responding to that at both ends of the spectrum right now. There's organizations doing the right thing, like McKinsey. They've changed how they hire because of AI. And since the start of the year, they've been piloting a new final interview where candidates use their internal AI tool together with a case study. And interviewers judge how the candidate prompts it, challenges it, applies their own judgment to the output, not whether they get the right answer. So I think that change of thinking is going to become more and more important about how do we use the AI as part of our thinking. And organizations that I speak to are also looking for AI fluency. So it's not something that we want to necessarily avoid. We want people who have really good fluency, but they need to be able to understand how to use the tool and prompt correctly and reason through it rather than just taking what the AI says is correct. Ofqual, UK's exam regulators, has come up with some detailed guidance as well around some of those tensions. So probably also worth looking at. But yeah, I think that's really where I sit with this, is looking at what evidence will convince us of genuine competence is the best place to start.
You used the word fear in that answer, and then you gave us stats about just how much AI use is changing what we see and how our candidates interact with assessments and with what they do in general. On that fear piece, often when I go to bed at night, I've got this recurring image in my head of some senior manager bursting out of his office after reading the latest AI article, the latest AI stats, and they rush out and say, right, guys, AI changes everything. We've got to rewrite every multiple choice question in our bank, and we've got to do it now. And is that actually where they should start?
I think before I knew better, that would have been my first instinct too, but it is the wrong one because we shouldn't act reactively. we need to think about this proactively and how we can future-proof our assessments and our tests and exams. So rewriting items is just a content fix for what's rather a method problem. So the format is still testing recall. If you put in new recall questions, it's not changing anything. And if you're wanting to AI-proof our tools, it's not going to make a difference. So there's actually a really practical example of an alternative that some organizations are using, and it's sometimes called the answer key model. I don't know if you come across it, but so someone completes a task independently and then compares their own reasoning against an AI-generated answer, often together with the manager or the learning provider. And the comparison itself becomes the evidence, but the learning opportunity as well. And it's not just whether they landed on the right answer, but how they reasoned, how they diverged or didn't diverge from the AI, and whether they can justify their own thinking. So it's a much richer signal than rewording a multiple choice questionnaire could ever be. But I'd say never react in terms of fear or urgency. Take a step back, think through what are we really trying to achieve here, and start with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey likes to say.
So we're not really talking about replacing, rewriting, rebuilding our assessments overnight. We're talking about improving the quality of the evidence that they produce and the way that we gather it.
Yes, exactly. It's doing it in a smarter way rather than just doing what we've done before just because, that might have worked in the way that we've assessed before, fine. And there's no reason to completely throw out the rule book. We can still ask those questions. We can still check recall and knowledge, but it's trying to build some more substance around that.
I suppose I'm trying to think about people listening to this who probably most of them are sitting in a job where they don't have a 6, 7, 8 person assessment design team sitting beside them. They've got deadlines, they've got restricted budgets. Their day-to-day job is spinning 1,000 different plates. And then they've got a stakeholder who's quite far removed from the day-to-day work, who's read one LinkedIn article and now wants everything to be changed by next month. In practical terms for that organization, where would you actually tell them to start?
Say don't try to redesign everything at once. Again, take that breath, take that step back, and start by auditing your high stake assessments first, the ones where a wrong call could actually cost you. But then also look for low cost additions to what you already have rather than a full rebuild. So Bank of America is a good example here because rather than overhauling their whole assessment process, they kept their intern class steady and used simulation exercises to build judgment in the early careers alongside things like the answer key comparison that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So explaining your reasoning component. So adding that component to an existing task rather than throwing out the whole task itself can just shift the evidence quality without touching the whole format. So I'd say, take a step back, prioritize by risk, not by which stakeholder is shouting at you the loudest. And no one can really argue with that if you're coming with that reasoning.
From your experience, where do the organizations that you speak to tend to waste the most effort when they're going through that process?
It's probably wasting effort trying to reinvent the wheel or change everything. There are some organizations doing this in a very interesting way. I pulled the evidence today from a McKinsey article that popped into my inbox at the right time. So we can get some really, really good examples of how organizations are doing this, but also use the expertise that you have around you. So I might shamelessly plug myself here, and I can come in and support you, or the team at Cirrus. There are people who can support you in this. It's not going to cost a fortune, but mainly be a time saver in the long run. But I think the main thing to keep in mind is just keep calm. You don't need to overhaul everything, and just do what you can, even if you're a small team. Even if it's just explain your answer question in a video, a voice note, or something where it's them.
And actually, that leads beautifully on to what we'd like to try and do in these sessions is try and translate the theory into the kind of real world environment so that people listening have got something to take away that's tangible for them. Tomorrow morning, people that have listened to this are going to go back to their desk and they'll have assessments to review, taking into account not just what we've spoken about today, but everything that you've learned from what you do. Can I ask you, if I'm that person, if I'm going to sit at my desk tomorrow morning and I've got another assessment to review, what should I stop doing? And I guess also, what should I start doing if I really want to start to make those changes to make the evidence more valuable?
Yeah, so I think we've touched on a number of times today in terms of, stop trying to be reactive, take a step back, think about this proactively and reasonably. It's a practical problem. We can solve it. So calm the nerves. But something that I'm quite passionate about in terms of stop doing is I've seen it in my space where some people use a single score as the whole story about someone. And I think if someone has a bad day or test taken under stress, that ends up becoming the story of who they are, what they're capable of, or can really impact their self-esteem. But where it's likely just a snapshot in time for them. So it's kind of moving away from that. And what to start doing is building a small portfolio of evidence over time, rather than relying on that one score. So I know through the testing process, you'll have your kind of mini questions or discussions or essays or whatever it might be throughout the process, but collect that as a portfolio of evidence. Or even just adding that one extra element about people explaining their reasoning actually changes what you can defend if that decision is ever challenged. So I think those are some of the easy things to start off with. Of course, if you do need to do reviews, also start doing those kind of regularly rather than, again, reactively when you think, okay, well, we haven't looked at this for 5 years. Now let's have a look at it. Schedule in your diary, maybe every year, every so often we need to go through this and do it under those calm conditions when it's important but not urgent, rather than when it's really urgent and we have to change things immediately.
That's really interesting. Several months ago, I went to visit my mother, which I don't do often enough. And my sister-in-law was there as well. And she, at that time, worked in a care environment. And then, they had to do assessments on a regular basis to make sure that they're on top of legislation, whatever. And she was sitting on the couch in my mum's house with her laptop, with the assessment open. She had her mobile phone beside her, and pretty much with every question that she was looking at, she was then going to her mobile phone and she was putting in the question so that she'd get the answer and just plugging the answer in pretty much word for word that she got from the internet. And at the time, my first instinct was, oh, goodness, AI is really threatening what we do. But the more I thought about it, and I guess in line with what you're saying, it really isn't about AI at all. It's about evidence and making sure that we're gathering the evidence. And even that little piece you spoke about there about asking people to explain their decisions.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's not about the technology, it's about the evidence. What you're trying to do at the end of the day as an accreditor or a training organization is that you want to make sure that your students or your candidates have high levels of competence at the end of that process. So it's about measuring the competence, not about the technology. The technology is here to stay. I think we have to accept that AI is here, it's here to stay. We have to adapt, and the ones that figure out how to adapt to that are going to come out ahead.
Is that quite a big mind shift from just thinking about, I have to write a question to test ABC, to I have to start to build evidence to prove competency? Is that a mind shift that people are open to, or is it something that people are still struggling with a bit?
It definitely is a mind shift, because it's moving away from the way we've always done things, to thinking about it slightly differently. And I'm sure that there's lots of people listening in that are grappling with this and trying to figure out how do we move from the way that we've done it in this multiple choice manner to make sure that we are covering these bases, that we are measuring actual competence. I think that's quite normal. But I think if you take a step back and you look at it, you'll notice one or two things. One thing is that it's kind of inevitable that we have to move this way. So we should probably try and accept that. And two, it is the better way to measure people's ability and competence, because you're looking at beyond just parrot recall. I've had conversations with a lot of people about, how the schooling system needs to change. It was designed in a way that you just parrot your responses back, but then you never actually retain any of that information. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that parroting back information is not how we learn and retain information. I tend to quote a model by the Center of Creative Leadership, the 70-20-10 model. Only 10% of our learning happens through traditional learning means. 70% of our learning happens on the job. What on the job means is applying our knowledge and applying that to real world situations where we can experience it. So that's always been how we work. And I think it's a good time that we start to pivot more into that direction.
And you spoke about an inevitability about us moving in that direction, and I couldn't agree more. But one of the challenges that I face, and really just want to see if you have a similar kind of experience, is a lot of people that I speak to are still very much wedded to the way we've always done things. We know it works, so we don't really want to change it. Do you find that same kind of response when you speak to people? And if you do, how do you try and get them to come out of that place?
It's human nature, especially when we're under stress, to cling to what we know because it's our safe space. We don't want to change when we're under stress. So, as I said, it's about thinking about these things more proactively when you are in the right frame of mind to do so. But if you're telling people that, okay, we need to overhaul our whole testing process and we need to do this in the next week, you're not going to get the best out of people. So I think there is this tension, and you also have tension in different personalities. You might have, more of those kind of innovator minds, like people McKinsey. We go, okay, we're going to change the way we do everything. And that's just that sort of environment where other people, they like that stability of we know what we're going to get, and we know that this is going to be accurate, at least what we've experienced. But yeah, change can't happen under pressure. We have to do it in a positive, supportive environment for people to be able to think creatively and how to solve this problem.
Okay. So I guess to sum up, if there was one thing that after listening to this session today, you wanted people to take away and remember, what would that be?
Whatever AI does next, and we don't know where this is going. We know this yet to stay, as I said. We don't know what the implications are just yet. But the organizations in the strongest position won't be the ones with the tightest lockdown and the tightest security. They're going to be the ones that can actually defend the evidence if someone challenges a decision. So that's the real shift from proving that you've stopped cheating to proving that you've actually measured the right thing. And of course, if anyone wants to know more information, I'm sure they can come to you guys, or I'm always happy to help as well.
Fantastic. Paula, honestly, I really can't thank you enough for your time on this. It's been really brilliant, and I'm already looking forward to the next session that we do together, where we'll look in a bit more detail about how we can better assess competency in our assessment designs. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, it's been great. Thanks. To everyone listening out there, thank you so much for your time. I really hope that you have found this to be as fascinating as I have. For those that are interested, at the end of the session, we also have some additional helpful explainers and tools, which will support the content of the podcast. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. It was amazing. If you had asked me 20 years ago if I was excited about education, I would have said no, because I was such a terrible student because A, I'm neurodiverse, B, that doesn't really matter if you have the right tools or the right support and education. And, sitting in a classroom, listening to directions, listening to information, it's gone in 5 minutes. And if expected to take a comprehensive exam, I'm not going to remember any of that. But I always really liked to work. As soon as I was old enough to work, I loved it. Someone shows me, trains me how to do the thing, asks me to perform what they just showed me, and then I can do it for myself from now on. I loved that, So I love the practical examples of education changing to where you're building a portfolio of evidence, that a student didn't just have one bad day or wasn't asked to sit in a classroom when they have ADHD and their mind is going in 50 different directions, and they're asking to collect evidence of competency. And I think that's really brilliant. So thank you. You made me excited about the future of education, because I do think that we have this AI panic, because it is changing things so fast. And it's like, well, will education be able to catch up? And the way that we're doing things is not aligning with the way that technology is changing at the pace that it is. So yeah, it's really nice to have somebody with insight into how we can work with it. So as Robbie said, we always like to leave you with something practical. So not just another theory. So 3 ways of thinking about assessment. Is this still giving us the evidence that we actually need? So we want to think in 3 different lenses, and that's evidence-based design, authentic assessment, and proof-driven assessment. You don't need to become an expert today, but understanding the questions that they encourage you to ask can completely change the way you think about exams. So, Robbie, would you start us off with evidence-based design?
Yeah, I would love to. This all does relate back to a lot of what Paula was touching on today. So if we start with evidence-based design, I guess at its heart, it's really one simple question. What proof would convince us that this person can actually do the job? So most of the time when we sit down to write an assessment, we think about what questions should we write. Evidence-based design kind of turns that on its head, and it starts with the decisions that we're trying to make, and it identifies the evidence that we really need to collect in order to support that decision. Only then do we start to think about how we should test it. So instead of designing the questions first, we start with the evidence and we design for evidence. So as an example, imagine we're assessing someone to see if they can understand a set of workplace policies. Traditionally, that might mean that we ask them a series of multiple choice questions, which asks them to recall the rules. But if what really matters is whether they can apply those rules in practice, then the assessment changes. And instead of asking them if they can remember what the policies are, we're asking them to apply those policies to realistic situations and then maybe explain the decisions that they've made and why they've made those decisions. So it's much richer evidence. And I guess the question that we're asking ourselves then is, what's the assessment actually proving? And is that the proof that we really need?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Let's talk about the next lens, which is authentic assessment. And I think it's my favorite concept because it's really simple, but it changes the way that you look at assessment. It's not about, like Paula said, replacing every multiple choice question with something more complicated. It's really about asking, are we assessing people in a way that resembles what they'll actually do when they leave the exam? Because, most jobs, I think I would fair to say all of them, do not involve sitting in a room with no resources, no internet, no AI, and answering multiple choice questions. They solve problems by researching, collaborating with colleagues, checking policies, making judgment calls. And so that's what success looks like at the workplace. But the exams tend to not reflect what that is. I'll use my own personal example. I was a chef for many years, and working in a kitchen is vastly different than going to culinary school and learning how to make a roux. At that point, you're reciting recipes to me. You don't actually know how to do it in the kitchen. When the head chef is, yelling at you and there's a million tickets and there's chaos going on and there's heat and people yelling, culinary school, they're not preparing you for that. Of course, I wouldn't really recommend assessing someone with knives and fire and in a stressful environment, but that's what it is. And I think learning on the job is really important, asking somebody to answer multiple choice questions as a part of a retail exam, let's say, is not the same thing. I mean, I think what better would be to ask them to, write an email that they would send to a customer, asking them to perform the task that they're actually going to be doing on the job. So it's not about, you're assessing prioritization, communication, decision making, and not just info recall. It doesn't mean that every assessment has to become a simulation, but sometimes changing the context of a question or asking somebody to explain the reasoning or why they chose an answer gives you a far richer experience and actually trains you for what the real job is asking you to do. So if someone is passing this assessment with flying colors, would I genuinely feel confident putting them in a real world situation? Is somebody good at taking an exam, or are they actually competent? If the answer is yes, you're probably on the right track.
That chef example is a brilliant one, Cristina, and I caveat that by saying my only exposure to chefs is watching Gordon Ramsay on the television, and I suspect that's not real. But in that environment that you spoke about, when you left the kind of educational environment and you were thrust into that real world kitchen with head chefs and everybody shouting and bawling and screaming at you, did you feel really ill prepared for the actual job, even having gone through the culinary school?
Well, full disclosure, I didn't go to culinary school. I actually started as, washing dishes in the kitchen, and kind of moved my way up. But I would say yes. I mean, even just going into a simple retail job, my first job, I was also doing school alongside working, and I never felt the relevance of school. School was just, you go finish high school and then you go to college and you graduate with a degree and you go get your big girl job. And that was, the path that everybody followed. Maybe things are changing now. I hope things are changing. I mean, 4-year university is good for some people, but other people might benefit from going to a trade school, or learning on the job, going into more of an internship, or an apprenticeship. I did the 4-year college thing, and it wasn't for me because indeed, as soon as I got into a real world situation where I'm dealing with colleagues or I'm dealing with customers, difficult situations, having to make snap decisions based on experience, that's, in my opinion, in my experience, it was not something that I thought that college prepared me for. I loved learning on the job, but I did work with people that had graduated from culinary school, and I will say that they were very ill prepared for working in a kitchen. It was always kind of a, oh, here comes the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed person right out of culinary school, and they have their shiny knife roll, and I'm like, oh no, this person's going to be a nightmare to work with until they get it, and it's like a dance in the kitchen sometimes. Yeah, so I was on the other end of that.
You'd almost think we planned this, which of course we haven't, but that actually leads beautifully onto the last of the 3 lenses you spoke about in the proof-driven assessment piece. And I know that people often get confused between evidence-based design and proof-driven assessment. And there is an important difference. So whereas evidence-based design is asking us, what evidence do we need? Proof-driven assessment is asking us, is that evidence strong enough to defend the decision? So in other words, if a candidate or a manager or a regulator challenges the result, can we confidently explain how the evidence supports that decision that we made? And so to your point, I guess, if you've got the person coming through culinary school and all they're doing is answering multiple choice decisions, is that really giving us the evidence that justifies why we gave them the job in the first place? To go back to the point Paula touched on earlier, rather than relying on a single score, we might actually start to think about that portfolio of evidence. So that might be an exam, it might include a practical task, it might be short explanations about why the candidate did what they did. And together, I guess these pieces are all much stronger. They tell a much stronger story than any one of them could alone. So proof-driven assessment helps us to ask ourselves, could I confidently defend the decision if someone challenged it? And that kitchen story is brilliant, Cristina. That I'm going to remember that one. I might even pretend that it's mine.
You're welcome to it.
Thank you. In summary, if there's one thing that I'd like people to take away from today, it's that better assessment actually starts with better decisions. And once we're clear about the decision that we're trying to make and the evidence that we need to support it, then designing the assessment becomes much easier. And then to return to Paula's point, it doesn't mean that we've got to redesign everything overnight. It doesn't mean that we have to panic. We can start by asking ourselves just 3 simple questions. What proof do we actually need? Does this task reflect the real world? And can we confidently defend our decision if we're asked to? And I guess for me, those 3 questions alone often give us real opportunities to strengthen the assessments that we design without having to rebuild everything from scratch or feel that we're completely floundering in a kitchen that we're not prepared to be in.
Yeah, indeed. I think it was an absolutely brilliant session. Paula, thank you so much for your insight and for making me really excited about the future of education. We try to have practical advice, and we would like to also give you something that you can take home with you. So we've designed a 1-page guide you can download. I hope this helps, and I hope you find it useful. And I hope that it prompts new questions and conversations within your organization. And we'd like to hear how you get on. So thank you for listening. Thank you again to Paula, Robbie. You two are brilliant, and I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.